Welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name's Tim Wade.
And my name is Joe Augustin. Welcome to a show that likes to have a look at all sides of everything whenever possible, possibly also making your conversations and your life maybe a bit more complicated. We also like to get a diverse point of view. So besides the three of us, we bring in a fourth person where possible. And today, that fourth person is someone who's made it her mission to inspire hope, foster wholeness, and unlock true potential with a career spanning some 22 years, 14 job titles, 8 industries, and 3 careers. She has a deep understanding of the need for constant reinvention. An inspirational TEDx speaker who's also the founder of Wholeness at Work. And she's someone who has more than once said it is an act of rebellion to live as a whole person in a broken world. Joining the No Show today is Cheryl Bernardi. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Tim. Thank you so much for bringing up that quote of mine. And thank you so much, guys, for having me as part of your conversation today.
It's great to have you
glad to
here.
have you, man.
Yeah. So just give everyone a rundown of who you are and what you do and what you care about.
Well, I've recently moved my home base from South Africa to New Zealand. When I say recently, that's been the past 5 months. So nuance is very acute in my life right now as I'm learning things for the first time again in a new country. And I have a 4-year-old daughter, so I take my motherhood seriously. I've written 2 books, and my primary mission in life is to help people to, like Tim shared, to help them to experience wholeness in a broken world.
No, it's very, very
I'm also
important
mindful
topic.
because of the time difference. This is dinner time, right?
No,
Yes, it's dinner time. The time zones here are also taking a while to get used to.
Yeah.
Is this your first time moving countries?
It is my first time moving countries. It's not my first time moving home. So we've actually moved 8 times since we've been married. So I think like that prepared us for the change.
Yeah.
So yeah, my first time moving countries, and you don't actually know what that's like. I mean, Andrea, you have done that. You're doing it again. So I don't think I've got the guts as you do to move to do it again. But I think as you get older, it's more difficult to uproot your life. And actually, maybe that's a good thing. So one of my main reasons for moving was to disrupt myself, to grow as a global professional. And so there's a lot of discomfort with that. And yeah, that's part of the learning journey.
Yeah, I was going to say another chapter in your reinvention journey.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think I've moved countries 8 times, and we're going to be doing a 9th country move. And it's intense moving countries. But the one thing I've learned is you've got to get through the first year. Because there's a lot of misery in the first year. Yeah, you got to get through the first year. You got to get through all the cycles of the weather and the patterns, and the way life goes. But if you can get through that first year, I think you've got a really good chance of being able to establish yourself successfully. But it can be hard, right? And so expat communities like we've all been part of, they're easier. Everyone wants to be your friend. But when you move to a country which doesn't have a big expat community, it can be very, very challenging to find people to make friends and to build communities. But when you've got a daughter, I think that a 4-year-old's a good door opener for new friendships, right?
And I think also it's about not just belonging to your own group. So yes, it's very comfortable to be in your expat community. There's a lot of South Africans here in New Zealand, but also there's so many new groups to interact with that we wouldn't maybe know in our own countries. And so I've just found by volunteering, by asking people if I could shout them a coffee, as they say in New Zealand, they've been very open and embracing. And it's learning the nuance of not just assuming that I think I know this group because of what people have said, but actually meeting more people in that group and figuring out for myself, what do you really like, and giving them a chance to know you as well.
Well, today's theme is nuance. We're going to get down to it in a little while. But as usual, we're going to start off with a quick look at what's been happening. So the quick takes from around the world. Andrea, you kicking it off?
Yeah, I am. I was just going to put this up. Where is it? There it is. If you've got a question, you want to say something, you want to contribute, jump in. We'll put your post up on the screen. We often have a lot of silent viewers, so participate, but put your name just in case we can't see it. All right. So the big news this week that was getting the media attention all over the world is, of course, the floods in Dubai, the wider area UAE, and, of course, in Oman. And there's been a really interesting argument that I've been tracking. So Bloomberg released a an article saying that it was because of cloud seeding, and that was sort of fairly much accepted right across the world in the media. And then the scientists basically said, no, that's absolutely not the case. So it had been predicted days before. There's been no seeding in the environment. So there's a big conversation going on. But of course, it suits the denialists to say that because it's human caused, not climate change caused, right? So, but it's not just the UAE that's been suffering. Pakistan and Afghanistan have both suffered horrendous flooding with more than 100 dead. And of course, before this, we saw the dramatic footage of flooding in both Russia and Kazakhstan. There was a dam burst. And also in South Africa, Cape Town experienced some extreme flooding. And I know that because I was talking to someone and they had to jump offline because they had to escape their house. So I hope everyone's okay. But just a reminder, for every degree of warming, we get 7% more moisture in the atmosphere. So what we're seeing now is only going to get worse. So
I think we should have led with that from a change the perspective. Every degree of warming, and we keep talking about extinction and everything else, and people are like, yeah, but if you go every degree of warming, there's 7% more humidity. I think people will go, maybe we should do something.
Yeah,
because they can feel
I don't know.
it.
I don't know what it's going to take.
Yeah.
I mean, another report came out this week that we basically lost the entire coral reefs around the world to bleaching this year. You know, and just think of the ramifications of that, Joe.
Yeah, let's see if news like this helps. Millions of children are at risk and of death, by the way, says the UN, as we're feeling the heat here in East Asia and the Pacific. According to an article in Bloomberg about the extreme heat in the region, children are more vulnerable to heart and respiratory conditions, and Asian authorities are warning citizens of fatal heat strokes. So good advice to be careful.
Yeah.
Over in Morocco, they're running out of water, and it's facing severe drought as the Al Masira reservoir dries up. They've had 6 consecutive years of severe drought, and this has led to record temperatures and increased evaporation across Morocco. So you can check that one out on BBC as well.
Well, it seems to be that we might get to a time where we order microplastics as a side serving to our meal. They seem to be everywhere now. The results of new research published in the Science News this week show that microplastics are now linked to heart attacks and strokes. So with the research, they are finding that more microplastics or nanoplastics are being found in the arteries. But scientists are saying, let's not panic yet. They're still doing research, but it is a good idea to reduce plastic use.
Yeah, and this is where I say, Andrea, you were right again.
Yeah. Well, no, the research is interesting because it's very recent that they've started to publish this research. And for the longest time, everyone's like, oh, plastics are fine. It's even in our bodies, it's fine, but it's not. You know, there's so many aspects to it. All right. So in Australia, we saw 2 multiple stabbing events in the last week, which is very shocking for a country like Australia. So the first one was in a shopping mall in Bondi Junction in Sydney. And the second was in a church, and it was carried out by a 16-year-old, and it's been confirmed as terrorism. But the first stabbing in Bondi, to me, it looked, from everything I've been reading, and it's obviously not the conclusive final reports yet, but it looks like the actions of a man with mental health challenges. I saw his parents being interviewed, and they're obviously shocked and horrified. But he's been in the care of doctors for decades, but he's an incel. So I was talking to my boys about it, and they're like, what's an incel? So it's involuntary celibate. Involuntary celibate. Yeah, that's it. Sorry. And basically, he's a man who's been desperate for a girlfriend. He hates women. And 14 of the victims were women. And apart from one man who died, and he's a former refugee who was there on his first day of work, and he got intervened, and that's why he died. But otherwise, it was all women, including a 9-month-old baby girl. So we've got to address this. We've really got to address this.
Yeah. There's some big news coming out of Ecuador and Mexico. Well, actually out of Mexico. Mexico's released security camera video of the moments when Ecuadorian authorities forced their way into Mexico's embassy, pushing a Mexican diplomat to the ground, and then carrying out Ecuador's former vice president who had been taking refuge there. The action Friday night has, of course, escalated tensions between the two countries.
Yeah, there's another good video I'll put in the weekend reads, which is the Ecuadorian president who's speaking. He's very young. Have you guys seen him? He's really young. He's very aggressive and he's determined to get the country under control. So it's a really interesting one to watch.
There's a bit of revealing news that's come out from Nike. And, well, it came out because Nike released images of the U.S. Olympic team's uniforms. Woo! Everybody wants to see that. But it got a lot of pushback from current and former female Olympians for its sexism, with one athlete claiming, my hoo-ha could, she said, wait, my hoo-ha is going to be out. That was from the long jumper. Basically, the women's uniform is a one-piece swimsuit with a very high crotch line, and they're competing in a swimsuit. So the good news is it's all come down as the female athletes have actually got many options. But there was one comment that I particularly liked from Lauren Fleshman, the name notwithstanding. But Lauren Fleshman, two-time U.S. champion of the 5,000 meters, wrote, "This is not an elite athletic kit for track and field. This is a costume born of patriarchal forces that are no longer welcome or needed to get eyes on women in sport." She said, "I don't expect or enjoy seeing female athletes or male athletes put in a position to battle self-consciousness at their place of work. That's not part of the job description. I live that life and know that excellence is born of unself-consciousness, of freedom and embodiment of action and instinct. Stop making it harder for half the population." And she sort of called them out. And I like that because, yeah, I mean, there's in movies, I remember watching Jumanji recently where the female character is like, why am I wearing in a forest shorts and basically a crop top bra outfit? Everybody else is in like sort of muscle man protective stuff. Is like, do I not get mosquito bites? Do I not do everything? So it's there is I find this a very welcome slap, so that they can take into account they can just stop. Yeah, one person also said. This was Woolstenfield said, "Did anyone consult a woman on this race kit?" And somebody else said, "If it was that aerodynamically effective, men would be wearing it as well."
Yeah,
and
it's a really important issue because a lot of girls, sort of as you go into puberty, a lot of potential champions would step away from sport at that point because of self-consciousness, and so it's an important one.
My wife used to play volleyball at university, and they gave her a kit to wear for one of the competitions, and she just refused because it was like spray-on pants. Yeah. And she said, "I'm not wearing that." And then eventually they relented and said, "Fair enough." But it was, yeah. So it's been a long time thing. If my wife was talking about it when she was at uni, it's been going on for a while. But it's good that this has got such a prominent slap. Anyway, I've taken a bit too much time on this one, but yeah, I think it's an important one.
Yeah, I think your hoo-ha is showing that, Tim.
Sorry.
Well done on her for speaking up and actually saying, "I will not just be subject to the male gaze." Something you mentioned, Andrea, about the coral bleaching events. This is what's happened this week. Ocean heat is driving a global coral bleaching events. I had to really figure out what this was all about. It's actually the worst on record. More than 54% of the world's coral reef areas have experienced bleaching in the past year, affecting at least 53 countries and territories, including large swaths of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean. So for the people watching like me who didn't know what that is, it means that when corals are exposed to stress from marine heat waves, they spit out the algae living within the tissue, which provides them with both the color and most of the energy. So why this is important is because if the ocean temperatures don't return to normal, bleaching can lead to mass coral death, and that can threaten species and food chains that rely on them with collapse. So I thought I'd add that for people like me who didn't know what that was.
Yeah, cool. It's the consequences are so devastating, and I'm expecting to hear that the coral in this area of the world, the original corals came from the Philippines. I'm expecting they're going through extreme heat, so I'm expecting it to become much bigger because it's, ecosystems collapse. Billions of people rely on the fish. Then, of course, you've got the ecosystem collapse in the ocean, which means that we're going to lose massive amounts of species in our oceans, as you know, because it's a top-down impact and bottom-up impact. But then everywhere that lives behind the coral reef, so every city, town, so you think of the Queensland coast behind the Great Barrier Reef, they're no longer protected from storm surges. So the implications of this are so huge. And the Great Barrier Reef's going through its 5th bleaching in 8 years or something. And, every bleaching, it needs time to recover, but it never gets the time. And that's a huge issue. So I personally think we've already lost the reefs, even though we haven't lost the reefs yet. I think that's the inevitable outcome, and it's going to have a major, major impact.
It makes one kind of look at the ocean differently when you're walking down the beach again, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's not good what's going on there. All right, so just a final funny one. Hannah Waddingham, who was in Game of Thrones, she was what was her character? She was the stern nurse that was punishing Queen Cersei. Do you remember when she was locked up in the tower? Anyway, but also, yeah. No, it's not none. Yeah, but she was also more recently in Ted Lasso. She's the very tall, lovely blonde lady with a great voice.
Yep. Anyway, she club. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, exactly. If you haven't watched Ted Lasso, everyone should watch Ted Lasso. It's amazing. But anyway, she was on the red carpet recently. I can't remember what for, and she was recorded saying to a photographer, "Don't be a dick," after he asked her to show her leg, and she said, "You would never say that to a man." So she's a very interesting lady, and she's doing some really cool stuff. But she's also speaking up more. So yeah, keep an eye out for that.
Okay, so let's get into some of the meatier stuff. There's an article in Business Insider which basically covers the life and times of the man who threatens to rule us all at some point. It depends on your perspective on things. Sam Altman. The name Sam Altman for most is just linked directly to ChatGPT, AI. So we talk about the things that are happening there. AI in all its glory, if you like. OpenAI has done so many things. Sam Altman, of course, very much linked to that. But there's a lot more to Sam Altman in terms of what he has invested in as well, and where his vision of the future is. I mean, there are a lot of people who have visions of the future. Not as many people are as invested literally in terms of finances and influence as well as Sam is. So, I mean, we all understand the idea of AI. Sam Altman does have an idea that it will change the world for the better. He is hyper optimistic, as some people might describe him, which makes him, for some, hyper risky, as in prepared to take. Because of the large steps forward, he feels that there's some gaps that he's willing to encounter on that journey to where he ultimately wants to get to. So besides AI, his investments also include nuclear fusion. That's part of a counterbalance thing where he understands the idea that AI takes a lot of power. It's gonna require a lot of energy. And he's also trying to do something about that. He's putting his money where his mouth is. He doesn't represent a large enough investment to completely offset it. But if he is successful with nuclear fusion, as he has been with AI, he will make a huge difference, because the world currently is going through this tremendous energy crisis. Like as much as we know it's bad for us, we're still addicted to the usual forms of fuel. And if we can get ourselves out of it with enough of a push, like the kind of push that happened when AI showed itself to be successful through ChatGPT, if nuclear fusion had a similar sort of test case that became as successful as that, we could see a very, very interesting situation come out of that. But here's the thing. With what he's doing as well and what he's invested in as well, he could make trillions of dollars from this. That's where he sits on this. So forget Elon Musk in terms of a man with impact. This is where the action's at, and we just talked about the first thing that he's involved with. The other thing is about silicon and the idea that he wants to make computing power. It is what many people feel should be a human right, but he wants to make it as free as air and water, so ubiquitous it's everywhere. So everything around you lives and breathes, and it is actually a source of computing and augmentation, which is quite an interesting idea, because if you think about, like you've had moments where you just can't remember something, or you struggle to think about something, whatever it is, and all that, imagine it as a thing of the past. You'll never not have access to the information you need. That could be interesting. The other thing that I think he's very much working on is also, of course, delayed death. I'm talking about healthy longevity as well. There is a push around the world by a growing number of scientists and clinicians who are coming together now on the idea of curing death, defeating old age, and treating old age like a disease. It's a different mindset. It's not the same kind of idea that someone 10 years ago had when you said, I'm going to live to a ripe old age. Now it's living into a ripe old age where I will feel like I'm not at that particular age. And of course, I think there's so much more that's happening because he simply is Sam Altman, and he is so future leaning that the small idea that probably big leaps and bounds coming in on this table to be considered. So we talk about the unknown future of quantum computing, for instance, and in the realm of quantum science, quantum physics. If we're able to make some real huge leaps, I mean, the future could include things like teleportation, mind reading, and if quantum physics pays off on some of the ideas that it has, we could, alongside with, of course, Elon Musk terraforming Mars, we could have a means of communicating with our relatives who have left the planet in real time. But all this, again, still very science fiction-y. But Sam Altman, definitely someone who is poised very well for that. And if it all pans out, and let's say even you know what, even if none of it pans out and he just keeps on this trajectory with OpenAI, he could be the next overlord.
Oh, new one. So Joe, I was really interested to hear what you were going to say on this piece, because I recently did some pretty deep dive into the impact of artificial intelligence from an energy perspective, right? So a couple of weeks ago, the Wall Street. I'm just gonna mute you for a minute, Cheryl. It sounds like there's. Yeah, that's it. There's a lot of background noise, so just unmute when you need to speak. Yeah, there's this Wall Street article, Wall Street Journal article, and it was basically about one of the biggest fossil fuel conferences in Texas, right? And for the first time in its history, it was flooded with technology execs, all looking for energy solutions for artificial intelligence. And the conclusion is they're going to have to, like, there'll be tech companies that will be building gas, what do you call those things?
Turbines. Yep.
Yeah. Nuclear, of course. And Bill Gates is obviously big behind that, but also coal, which is the dirtiest fossil fuel. And then just about a week after that, there was an article that basically the Pacific Northwest coast in the US, so that's Washington, Montana, Oregon, and one other, they're having a real energy crunch now, and it's because of the need to run the data centers. So when I got to the end of it, I was just like, so basically where we are right now, not Sam Altman's dream of the future, where we are right now with the acceleration in the environment, we can either embrace it and have no future, or we have to pull back and give ourselves a chance at a future, because the energy demands are so high. And of course, the data centers across the world, in parts of Africa, they're using local water supplies to cool data centers, but the farmers and the local people don't have access to water, so they can't grow food. So they're suffering from famine, and there's all these other ramifications that are going on. So I actually think we're at a really dangerous inflection point, and we're not paying attention to it. And I know there's a lot of excitement in our community around AI, but every time you put a little thing into your chat GPT, it costs a lot of energy, and we've got billions of people doing that. And this could be the end of us, but not for the reasons that people think with AI.
Yeah, so it calls for like in what Sam Altman does in his portfolio, a kind of compensation for what you're doing as well. So I recognize that there's a lot. I mean, I'll put it this way: if other investors did things the way Sam Altman did in terms of investing in the counterbalances to the technology, in terms of the needs for technology and all that, we far better off.
Yeah.
It's not ideal, it's not fantastic, but if you, I hope you're getting what I mean by that. But he is not agnostic to the fact that it's causing a challenge as far as energy concerns are, but he's trying to fix the problem as well simultaneously while he's exploiting the other technology. I think it also highlights what you're talking about, the need for integration of design. I think integration of design is it's happening in smaller countries like Singapore, for instance, where we get to integrate the rules of building design and energy requirements. It's actually more likely that we can come up with something that kind of works. Like we haven't perhaps kind of factored in energy needs for AI, but a lot of the buildings that come up in Singapore right now, anything that's new tends to be, especially the commercial, tends to be net zero. They work very much on making sure that the energy produced by the building is equal to the energy it's going to use, at least for the everyday running of the building. We can't control for everybody inside, but at least the building itself is not going to add so much to the problem. So I think there is potential. I would imagine if technologists got together with the people who are in charge of agriculture, and I think technology is going to actually be the way we can like sort of ramp up agricultural needs. That there is a natural way that technology that needs to use a lot of water can still have that water show up for agriculture. There's no reason why the water that's used for cooling cannot be used for agriculture as well, for instance.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I'll give you a number.
In the snow.
I'll give you a number there. So that's something else I researched. So ad tech, advertising technology, is a $800 billion industry. Ag tech, agricultural technology, is an $18 billion industry. So we're not, so it's sort of sign of the times, right? That there's so much on advertising, but the actual food security is not where we're investing our money. So yeah, no, I know. I've noted. I understand how Sam is out there trying to solve the problem. It's just that it feels like there's a mishmash between where we are right now and what we need to do.
Yeah.
And taking advantage of this, all of the great things this technology can do, but actually it could take us past the tipping point. So that's what I'm not seeing that conversation widely enough. All I'm seeing is excitement, and that concerns me.
Well, if you're not careful, we're going to start that conversation about nuance a bit early.
Yeah.
I'm just happy that we made a decision to get an EV, so I'm doing my best.
Nice. Yeah. All right. So I want to. There's so much that's going on in the environment at the moment that it's very difficult to choose a story and reject others. So I'm going to quickly go through three main stories that I've been picking up in the last week. So the first one is a piece in the Guardian. It's called "World Faces Deathly Silence of Nature as Wildlife Disappears." So basically, as technology develops, sounds have become an increasingly important way of measuring the health and biodiversity of our ecosystems. And so they're looking at forests, soils, and oceans, all of which produce their own sort of acoustic signatures. And scientists are using ecoacoustics to measure habitats and species that, and they're saying that basically quiet is falling across thousands of habitats as the planet witnesses extraordinary losses in the density and variety of species. So that's a big one that got a lot of attention in the last week, as it should. I'm always happy to hear the geckos and the birds singing where I am, because I know that that's not necessarily going to be something I'll enjoy in the long term. And then in the daily costs, massive ice loss in, God, I'm not having fun today, am I? Massive ice loss in Greenland is weakening its gravity, which will have ramifications for the southern hemisphere. So basically, there was this study on the ice loss in Greenland, and it was saying it was losing 20% more than they previously thought, but it didn't take into account that there's also an inland meltwater that is draining into the ocean. And of course, this water will impact the AMOC, Atlantic Meridional Occidental Current, which has massive ramifications worldwide. And this additional loss isn't in any of the reports, like the IPCC reports, which governments are basing their decisions on. So we are losing 30 million tonnes of ice on average an hour from Greenland. So it's so much ice that it's weakening the gravity over Greenland, and it basically has an impact on how the ocean is shaped. So I definitely recommend that. And then the final one is the climate crisis is a food crisis. And this is a really common phrase in the circles that I operate in on social media. And it needs to become a more common sort of understanding everywhere so we can get prepared. So there's been a lot of focus on the UK and Ireland, which is facing food shortages due to the excessive amount of rain. I mean, they've total crop failures, no potatoes, wheat, nothing. The summer crops haven't even been put in the ground because the ground's too wet. So this is obviously devastating for the farmers, but it's also devastating for the people and the poorest, because there's going to be more food inflation as they're going to have to import more food. Because this isn't just happening in the UK, these sort of conditions have happened across Europe, as well as drought, which we saw especially last summer. Italy, Spain, Greece all got hammered. And Morocco, as Tim just said, is getting hammered by drought as well. But if we head to the global south, and in Australia, heat and flooding have decimated crops. I've just before I was reading, there's an emergency meeting of the Western Australian farmers south of Perth. They've just, because of the extreme heat they've experienced, that's decimated. In Africa, they're in the middle of a really extreme drought event across multiple countries. Millions of people are at risk of famine. And where we are in the global south, so across Southeast Asia, we've been experiencing temperatures above 35 degrees Celsius for the last couple of months. And this is the rice growing region of the world, and there's going to be more heat to come. So we're hoping by the end of April, the rains will start, but India is going to be facing this until the end of June. But once temperatures get above 35 degrees Celsius, that's when the rice crops start to fail. And rice is an incredibly important staple. More than 50% of the world's population depends on rice for about 80% of its food requirements. So it's a massive thing. So the climate crisis is a food crisis, and food security is something we will be experiencing in the months and years ahead. Every country needs to really focus on making sure that they can feed their own people. And governments aren't doing this yet, but prepare as well as you can, stock up on things like tins of tomatoes and beans. If you can store carbohydrates like rice but it obviously needs to be in sealed airtight containers. I've got olive oil that we bought a couple of years ago that we've been gradually using, but we're stocking up and keeping it stocked up. So just look at what fruits and vegetables and even cows and lambs, right? In bad environments. The lambs in the UK, the mothers are aborting their babies. So meat is also, going to be impacted. So yeah, that's a big thing. So there's three big stories in the climate, which is why energy use for AI seems like a silly focus right now.
Unless AI can solve the problem, but I'm not sure it can solve the problem over in Arizona, where the headline is water is more valuable than oil. I did notice this a number of years ago when water started to be sold in shops and 7-Elevens and service stations and things like that, and you'd fill up your car with petrol, and then you'd go and buy a bottle of water, and the water was more expensive than the petrol. But this has got to the water out of the tap proportion. So this is a crazy article in The Guardian. I guess it's to be expected, but water is more valuable than oil. The corporation cashing in on America's drought. In an unprecedented deal, there we go, we hear the word again, unprecedented, but unprecedented deal, a private company purchased land in a tiny Arizona town and sold its water rights to a suburb 200 miles away. Nearly a decade ago, Greenstone Resources Partners, a private company backed by global investors, bought almost 500 acres of agricultural land in Cibola, Arizona. The company recently sold the water rights tied to the land to the town of Queen Creek, a suburb of Phoenix, for a $14 million gross profit. More than 2,000 acre-feet of water from the Colorado River that was once used to irrigate farmland is now flowing through a canal system to the taps of homes more than 200 miles away. Experts expect that such transfers will become more common as thirsty towns across the West seek increasingly scarce water. The climate crisis and chronic overuse have sapped the Colorado River watershed, leaving cities and farmers alike to contend with shortages. Amid a deepening drought and declines in the river's reservoirs, Greenstone and firms like it have been discreetly acquiring thousands of acres of farmland. Officials fear it will open the floodgates to many more private water sales, allowing investors to profit from scarcity and leaving the towns impacted dust bowls, leaving those towns that are impacted as effectively dust bowls. The Colorado River, which stretches from the Rocky Mountains into Mexico, has declined about 20% since the turn of the century, amid the most severe drought the west part of the United States has seen in 1,200 years. In a painfully negotiated deal, Arizona, Nevada, and California agreed to reduce the amount of water they draw from the river by 13% through to 2026. With ongoing shortages on the river driven by climate change, Colorado River water is going to become very valuable, said Rhett Larson, a professor of water law at Arizona State University. Anyone who understands this dynamic thinks, well, if I could buy Colorado River water rights, that's more valuable than owning oil in this country at this stage. You were talking about food scarcity earlier, but the short-term thinking here will also certainly guarantee wider food insecurity if the limited water is being used to serve sprawling new housing estates versus making sure the farmers have enough water to grow their crops. But what can the farmers do when they're suffering so much in this intense drought? Selling off their land and water rights is one of the only things they can do to survive.
Yeah.
It's really scary to hear that. I mean, I recently have left South Africa, but they also are struggling with their water provision, especially in Johannesburg. And for the next 6 months, they have to try and fix that. So it means 6 months with no water in Johannesburg.
Yeah, I mean, you guys Johannesburg was getting down to zero quite a few times, but I think the recent flooding has sort of helped fill some. But then you just go up north into Zimbabwe.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the mismanagement of the resources. There's multiple reasons why this happens, but
there's a lot of
an important resource.
A lot. But one of the other things that really, really concerns me, especially in the Asia Pacific region, is farms, especially up in the mountains. So up in the Philippines, up in the mountains where it's cooler. Governments generations ago gave families land, and they could keep the land as long as they farmed the land. As soon as they stopped farming the land, they lost the land, right? And what's happening now is these villas and rich people are buying up this land, building these massive villas, but no food's being grown. And the Philippines exports a lot of its food from China, and China's going through its own extremes. So, and this is happening where I am. Farms are being dug up and villas are being built, and food security. It's like it's not on the agenda yet. And I'm so concerned about what's coming next. Because when everyone wants food, when everyone needs to import food, where is it all going to come from? And of course, the cost of it's going to be extremely high. So it's a big one.
Yeah, but
can we start
I think one of the
food with AI? Maybe that can help.
Well, I was going to say one of the problems really is that, first of all, the reality and prepared to take blowback on this is that currently what is actually missing from a current situation. I'm not saying that we're not going to get really off the over the edge here. What currently stops us from having enough food security is actually logistics. Right, I mean, getting the food from where it is overgrown and wasted to where it is needed. That's the gap that we've got currently. I mean, there's enough, but it's just not in the right place. But there is that whole thing as well. It's going to be about cost, right? Who is going to take up the cost of that? Is there something in perhaps using the? I was watching your video about textiles, right, and the big problem it has in terms of a trade gap, right? Maybe that trade gap could be filled in some way by food, coming back
Yeah.
in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Or,
So that
or
was about,
batteries of energy.
but that's about. So there's three current big things impacting the supply chain. One is the Panama Canal, which is caused by climate change. The water's gotten so low, which to me is mind-boggling that we got to that point. Number two is the Suez Canal, which is of course a war geopolitical situation with the Houthis, and the third is the excessive supply chain committed to fast fashion. So these jumbo jets full of fast fashion are flying out of China to North America and Europe to deliver their goods, and they're coming back empty. But it's also taking up supply chain space for other things that potentially could be more important for humanity. So it's a big one, and we just seem incapable of looking at anything holistically, and it feels like I'm more and more convinced that we just don't have any long-term thinkers in leadership positions. Everyone's so short-term thinking, and we've built a short-term society. Our businesses are short-term, by quarter, that sort of thing. And we need some big picture thinkers and some long-term thinkers, and they're not being listened to as much as they should be. And I think that's a big issue that we've got right now.
I also think, Andrea, it's about helping individuals to start to look beyond just the story that they're being told, which obviously shows like there's help with that story. But it's also about, not waiting for other people to do something. But for example, fast fashion, I used to be a shopaholic. I've written about this in my first book. But when you start to see the impact of that, you think, well, no, that cannot happen. And so one thing I'm noticing in New Zealand, as I'm learning about the nuances of my new country, is that there is a definite shift towards, recycling clothing. There's tons of what they call op shops or charity shops here, recycling in terms of people selling their old clothes, and recycled shops is a massive thing here. Yeah. So I think, there are pockets that are seeing that, and, we need to maybe highlight those a bit more to say, hey, there's an alternative here.
Yeah, I think 10% of the global fashion industry is now sitting in the recycling space. So that's a massive surge. But one of the stats I recently learned is that we have enough clothes on the planet right now to clothe the next 6 generations of humans. So we've got an industry that's pumping out more and more and more, and we've already got enough to clothe the next 6 generations.
6 generations.
And it's in the Atacama Desert in Chile, which can be seen from space, and it gets burnt, but it also infiltrates microplastics into the environment. And just because it's over there doesn't mean it stays there, as we're seeing now with the waste crisis. Once it's in the water, it's going everywhere. So, but we've got these massive issues, and we need to solve them. And the only way we can solve them is globally. And we're all being distracted by all these wars and conflicts and territorial disputes, and we're just not. We need some grown-ups in the room, I think.
You said it, Andrea, grown-ups. Well, you spoke about burning. We can talk about the heat in India. India is facing extreme heat with predictions of well above normal temperatures until June. So in an article on CNN titled "Extreme Heat is Pushing India to the Brink of Survivability." So maybe don't plan your trip there yet. One obvious solution is also a big part of the problem. It starts with the story of Ramesh, a bricklayer in Delhi. Last summer, he said he often felt faint in the heat, but has no choice but to work so he can provide for his family. By 2050, India is expected to be among the first places where temperatures will cross survivability limits, according to climate experts. And within that time frame, the demand for air conditioners in the country is also expected to rise 9-fold. So that just means that the hotter it gets, the more they will use the air conditioners, and the more they use the air conditioners, the hotter the country will become. So it's an impossible problem. India emits nearly 2.4 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year, based on data collected by the European Union, contributing about 7% of global emissions. The US, by comparison, causes 13% of CO2 emissions, despite having a quarter of India's population. This raises a question of fairness that climate scientists have often asked. Should people in the developing world shoulder the cost of reducing emissions, despite being amongst those least responsible for rising greenhouse gases? India, which is going through its national elections at the moment, needs to answer the question: how can it balance its development while ensuring environmental protection? And I think there is a growing sense that this is important, even at the polls. So well worth a read, and keep an eye on India over the coming months.
Okay, I hope you're ready for your Tesla updates. Two big stories. First of all, as a company, Tesla has laid off, or will be laying off, more than 10% of its workforce. And as Elon Musk puts it, it's something that must be done. Now, that by itself maybe could sit comfortably with everybody else, if not for the other Tesla story that is currently in the news as well, where Tesla's board is trying to award Elon Musk with a pay package that is worth $65 billion. That's with a B. So on one hand, workforce reduction because it's necessary, and at the same time, the board is doing this thing, which the judge basically that is involved in the case is blocking because it is just an unfathomable sum that is being described. I'm not necessarily on the side of any kind of judgment which is based on unfathomable things, because that basically says we can't do things based on your imagination. But I think in terms of ethical balance, there are probably some better cases to be made. So, that's what's happening as far as Tesla is concerned. Workforce reduction because it's necessary, and a huge payday still on hold. They're trying to get it through, but it's being blocked for Elon Musk.
It's a tough one because those pay packages usually are negotiated years earlier for hitting a particular target. It's just, and it is unfathomable, but it was unfathomable when it was negotiated, and legally, theoretically, he's got the right to it based on what was promised with targets hit. And now that those targets have been hit, which usually can be hit if you throw more people at it to quickly hit the target, then he's got to lay off all those people because he's got his target. So I'm not defending it. I'm just trying to offer the other side to it, that is the legal justice side, which means usually we got to stop these. We got to. It's not that we can stop it, but we need to think about how these executive pay packages are negotiated and how they can impact. We don't really think about it. As shareholders, it's just like, I don't really care what he does so long as he gets the share price up and I make my money. And the whole thing is there's an element of individualism that I think has been a theme throughout this entire show so far. And that is when we just care about ourselves, and we're looking for the mechanisms in the world that will provide what we need, but those mechanisms are fundamentally broken, or they're built on a ideology or a philosophy that is self-serving to a minority at the damage or pain to lots of other invisible people. If I was just thinking before when we were talking about the longevity sort of idea of, hey, I can take this pill or this thing that's going to increase my age by another 100 years and I'll still feel like I'm 50, then, or maybe 35, then at what cost? Overpopulation costs or whatever. So I was just wondering, wouldn't it be interesting to go, you can have this, but your family and the next 3 generations of that family will be shipped to Mars, which has just been terraformed, and they'll be living in a bubble over there, helping work on that. So it's up to you, and to wonder whether people, if it impacts their family, would they do it? And my guess is, if it impacts their kids, they may not. If it impacts some generation 3 or 4 or 5 down the track, they might go, well, I don't really know them, so who knows what might happen.
Well, that's how everyone's behaving now, right?
Right. So it's like, it just feels like there's a machine here with lots of different cogs, and those cogs, we're not really looking at the big picture.
I just want to jump in there, Tim. I think, just bringing into perspective the fact that these big stories can kind of overshadow what other entrepreneurs and business owners are doing around the world. So, before I left South Africa, I was part of this group of social entrepreneurs. And I think those kind of stories are not told, and maybe we should be telling them more, because they are really driven by a sense of purpose and meaning, and looking at how to build businesses where you do take care of people. And obviously African leadership models are not, perfect entirely, or, leadership models in general. But I just think, as you say that, I'm noticing a gap in the narrative, in the conversations around, is it only Elon Musk as the epitome of entrepreneurship? As I started my own journey of entrepreneurship, I have to realize, hey, wait a second, there's this thing of like, I have to be, build up this big billionaire business and start a spaceship kind of company, because that's what entrepreneurs do. No, I'm a mom. So what do mothers who are entrepreneurs do? What do people who are seeing actual needs, what do entrepreneurs do? They solve problems, right, in their world. So you are just giving me inspiration, Tim, to help those stories that are not seen and not heard to really kind of get more airplay, because it's not just Elons of the world that are out there.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
100% agree with you. It's just we're idolizing gods, and it's.
I think it's because it's such a unique story, and people can't really imagine what they would do with that amount of money. But also, this is what I always tell students: there's also always the end. There's other stories. That's not the only. The whole danger of a single story, and what we kind of perpetuate, and how we actually deal with things. So the fact that you're inviting other people into this conversation, I think, is amazing, because it does give people that opportunity to say, oh, other parts of the world, this is what's going on. And maybe, it's not even to like challenge that or try and change that, but it's about saying, let's look at some of the things that are happening that is actually incredible, and how can we amplify that? How can we celebrate that? How can we try and emulate that?
So here was another thought I had. I'll come back to Elon in just a second. I mean, I agree with you. I also think that what an entrepreneur does is it's an undertaking, right? And it's an underwriting. They underwrite themselves, and they back themselves, and they try and get other people to invest as well, but they're backing themselves to be able to create something that solves a problem. If he's getting a $56 billion pay package, he's shown in the past, though, and I know I'm back on Elon again, that he will go and put that in something else.
And he's also a fellow South African, so we can talk about Elon.
Yeah. So he tends to put it in something else. Now, if one of the challenges we have we talked about the electricity and the cooling and everything else as well, and the electricity requirements. One of the big challenges we have is moving electricity around the world, from a place that can produce it, and the one that can be moved around is solid form or liquid form or gas form, I suppose, which is everything now. But it's the thing that we need to burn somewhere else. So, well, I'll move all of that over to you. You burn it and create the electricity. But if we could somehow harness solar, for example, and send it somewhere else, or big battery ships, which is what's talking about. But if Elon is investing in technology that can somehow move or create that energy grid that can solve an energy problem, and you give enough to somebody who's got the experience to be able to pull off a giant global level infrastructural change, I don't want to bash him too much. It's more like I want to see what he does with it.
Yeah, and the Machiavellian, I'm trying to say the word, Machiavellianism to actually do it. So, we need those somehow, in a way. So I think it's about finding ways to connect more, as you were saying, Andrea. How do we get more people who are big picture thinkers? I think they are out there. It's how do we give them platforms? How do we help them to realize that they actually have a voice, that they actually can solve this problem, not just in their country, but globally? And I can tell you that living in a country where you are basically in survival mode, it's difficult to think outside of that. It's difficult to even realize that, hey, wait a second, I have a voice. Now that I'm in New Zealand, I'm seeing a whole different world that I wouldn't have seen if I was only in South Africa. So I think that's something to encourage, is people to spread their wings to, Andrea, maybe you should write a book, do a TED talk about this, how to move countries, how to become a global citizen. I think that's needed. I think we need to visit each other. We need to live in our spaces. Maybe we're getting too quickly into the nuance conversation here, but We just have to alert people to realize that they also have a part to play in the bigger story.
Yeah,
that's what I wanted to add.
Absolutely. And cultural intelligence, I think, is a really important part of the nuance conversation, and you only get that when you move around. All right, so I want to share a story that is horrifying at the same time hopeful. So basically, some new research has come out, and I love research like this. And it's basically saying that the European colonizers killed so many Native Americans that it changed the global climate. So European settlers killed 56 million indigenous people over about 100 years in South, Central and North America. And what this did was it caused large swaths of farmland to be abandoned and reforested. And so this is a study by the University College of London. So the increase in trees and vegetation across an area the size of France that resulted because of what happened massively decreased the amount of carbon in the air. And basically in the year 1610, the Earth cooled. So it's called the mini or the little ice age. So Columbus arrived in this part of the world in 1492, in case you forget your history. So basically before this, the scientists had argued that it was just a natural weather event. But by combining the archaeological evidence, the historical data and analysis of carbon found in Antarctic ice, they've been able to show how the reforestation, which was directly caused by the Europeans' arrival, was a key component of the global chills. So so this is obviously a terrible, terrible story of genocide, right? But to me, there's another side of the story that's not in this article. And I follow a lot of doomers, and they're very realistic. They're very practical. Like, they're not depressing. They're just saying it as it is. And one of the things is that they don't think there's anything that we can do. That they think we've gone too far. What's happening now, even if we stop what we're doing right now, there's a cumulative build-up of things that are going to come at us for the next 100, 200,000 years. So no matter what, we can't change the trajectory we're on. So when I read this, I'm convinced that the best thing that we can do is really focus on a massive regeneration of the natural world, in all of its forms, right across the planet. And we should be able to draw down emissions, and maybe we will be able to cool the planet. And we need to cool it because it's going crazy. So the difference is, back then in the 1600s, we didn't have the fossil fuel industry, so it's a lot different now to what it was then. We've got a lot more of us spread around the world. But I think we've got to, everything everywhere all at once, we've got to get out there and basically regenerate the natural world. Stop the overfishing, stop the bottom trawling, stop the deep sea mining, just stop all the stuff that's contributing and focus all of our energy on this global regeneration effort. And I think this is an example where it actually worked, and we've got to try, rather than just accepting that it's just going to get worse and we're all going to die, which is
Elon,
where a lot of people are sitting.
Do this.
But we all need to do it. It's not, that's the thing. It's like, there's an article recently, 56 companies are responsible. I'm like, those 56 companies pull out oil, which then makes lots and lots of different things that we buy in massive quantities. So we're all part of the problem. So let's turn it around. The top 50% of the population need to change. The bottom 50%, we need to lift them up and give them dignity and life, where they've got access to the basics like clean air, food and water, right? So I don't know. It just to me, it's one of these, there's no hope in that conversation. We've gone too far. But if we could turn it all around, if we could regenerate this earth, we could do it. I believe we can do it. I'm still fighting for that.
It's good to have a fight to believe in, Andrea.
Oh, yeah. Trust me. Sometimes I haven't had any hope left, and I've been struggling. I'm always looking for hope.
Well, this is not overly hopeful, but I do want to share it. This is a powerful article in Open Mind magazine called Polluted Minds, and it's part of a series supported by the Pulitzer Center. It starts back in 1992 due to a growing population, choking traffic, and explosive industrial growth that Mexico City was labeled the most polluted urban area in the world by the United Nations. And The problem was intensified because the high altitude metropolis sat in a valley that trapped the atmospheric filth in a perpetual sort of toxic haze. Over the next few years, the impact could be seen not just in the blanket of smog overhead, but in the city's dogs, who had become so disoriented that some of them could no longer recognize their human families. At this time, neuropathologist Lilian Calderon Gacindueñas
Well done.
compared the brains of canines and children from what was dubbed Mexico City, capital had been dubbed, to those from less polluted areas. What she found was terrifying. Exposure to air pollution in childhood diseases, exposure to air pollution in childhood decreases the brain volume and heightens risks of several dreaded brain diseases, including Parkinson's and Alzheimer's as an adult. So today, she says the damaged brains she studied in young dogs and humans aren't just significant in later years. They play out in impaired memory and lower intelligence scores throughout life. Other studies have found that air pollution exposure later in childhood alters neural circuitry throughout the brain, potentially affecting executive function, including abilities like decision-making and focus, and raising the risk of psychiatric disorders. In places like China, India, and the rest of the global south, air pollution, both indoors and outdoors, has steadily soared over the course of decades. Nearly half the world's population breathes toxic air each day, including more than 90% of children. Some 2.3 billion people worldwide rely on solid fuels and open fires for cooking, making the problem far worse. The World Health Organization calculates about 3 million premature deaths, mostly in women and children, result from air pollution created by such cooking each year. In the US, which has cleaner air due to the Clean Air Act, still has millions of Americans breathing outdoor air loaded with inflammation triggering ozone and fine particulate matter. These particles, known as PM 2.5, can affect the lungs and the heart and are strongly associated with brain damage. Wildfires, like the ones that raged across Canada the past summer, are major contributors of PM 2.5, these particulates. A recent study showed that pesticides, paints, cleaners, and other personal care products are another major and unrecognized source of PM 2.5 and can raise the risk for numerous health problems, including brain-damaging strokes. The effort to figure out and intervene has sparked a new field of study. Get this is called exposomics, the science of environmental exposures and their effects on health, disease, and development. Exposomics, remember you heard it here, exposomics draws on enormous data sets about the distribution of environmental toxins, genetic and cellular responses, and human behavioral patterns as well. It's a big deal. It's a very powerful read. Great to see the science moving forward quickly, and I'd highly recommend you check out the article, Open Mind Magazine, an article called Polluted Minds.
Yeah, and if we regenerate the earth and clean it all up, we can solve some of these things, right? But the other thing is that understanding of what's the impact, right? So we can build societies around the impact. Like with long COVID, we need to build societies that can support people who are suffering from the long-term impacts of long COVID. We also need to be building societies that can deal with the impacts of this sort of stuff, and we're not. We're putting those sort of people in jail when they've basically been born into pollution, and it's impacted them. So I think it's shocking numbers, though. I mean, we've all been. So Cheryl, I'm just going to mute you again. You're a bit noisy there. We've all been through the haze from Indonesia, and I was pregnant with Lex. I was very worried about giving birth to him right in the middle of a big haze event. What would be the impact? It just cleared just before he was born, but I was still pregnant when it came. So yeah, no, it's a big deal.
And if we're burning more fossil fuels, whether that's to power AI or computers or cars or whatever, that burning is going somewhere.
Yeah.
Or you could just move to New Zealand where the air is great.
But the oceans are getting warmer. Yeah, for now.
Yeah.
You do have
I
a
know,
long
I
white
know.
cloud there, by the way.
Yes, I know. That's one of the things when I got here, I was like, why is the air so fresh? Why is the air so clear? I definitely felt the difference. So my thing I wanted to highlight, my story I wanted to highlight, is just, we listen to the news, we kind of get involved, we hear stories that kind of horrify us, and we want to do something. So I'm not sure if you remember that campaign, Bring Back Our Girls. That was 10 years ago when there was a mass kidnapping in Nigeria by Boko Haram, and they are an Islamist jihadist organization based in northeastern Nigeria. Well, there was recent news that a Nigerian woman was rescued 10 years after the kidnapping. So that was quite shocking, because you would think that they were all actually rescued by this time. It's been a decade. But actually, the woman that was rescued, Lydia Simon, was about 95 miles east of Chibok, I hope I'm saying that right. And that's where 276 schoolgirls were seized in April 2014. So that is a decade ago. As many as 82 are still missing. She is currently 5 months pregnant, and she has 3 children. And, this I wanted to highlight because one of the activists there was saying that some of the recently freed women were either raped by the insurgents or forced into marriages. And, when they come back even if they do get home, because of the trauma and violence they face, they are not returning as the same person. So it's easy for us sometimes to maybe share the post, and we need to have some part of social media activism. But in those situations, I think this is why people kind of shut down sometimes with the news, because it's overwhelming. They feel like, what can I do? What impact can I make? And so, even with the story with the mom and the baby, as a mom of a 4-year-old, that devastates us. And I think sometimes we just don't know what to do with that trauma. That's why I think it's easier for other people to have the conversations, because we don't want to get involved. But that's where the nuance is necessary, right?
Yeah, there was a recent another kidnapping of a bunch of young girls in Nigeria as well. But I remember that, and they're also rejected by their communities when they come back as well. That's the other issue, cultural issue that comes with those sort of situations when they've been raped and married off. It's just terrible.
So see, with those kind of things, Andrea, I think when we hear about those kind of stories, what can we do? We can find the NGOs that are actually supporting those women and contribute, support, do something. There are things that we can do. So obviously, we all have our own lives. We all have things that we are facing. We have our own wars that we are fighting. But if we just keep waiting for someone else to do something, nothing's going to change.
If you're comfortable, donate to charities around the world that are doing good work, at the local level, at the global level, but also raising awareness and keeping those women in the news, keeping them their attention, because, we've already moved on, got something else now, something new and shiny, or we're spending too much time focusing on people like Elon Musk versus the people like those ladies, who you can't even imagine the suffering. You can't even imagine what those women have been through, right?
And I think it takes courage to want to listen to those stories. I'm from South Africa, so you can already understand the traumas that I would have maybe faced as a South African woman. And that's why I wrote my book, because you were saying how you're searching for hope. I think helping people to own their story and realize that they're not just subject to a story where, well, this is the way the world is, so this is all that I have. We actually have access to personal agency and personal power. But that's where I think I feel so passionate about my wholeness message, because growing up in a country where you feel like this is it, this is the story, we had the whole Rainbow Nation thing happen. I was 14 years old when Nelson Mandela was released. And, to see a country kind of decline from that place of hope, that's heartbreaking. But I think for me, being married to someone who's not of my race, I'm married to an Afrikaans South African, I think that really helped with my nuance, because I couldn't just say, oh, he's the white oppressor, because this was someone that we connected with. And so you're building those bridges of meaning. So I think it takes intention to build those bridges of meaning. And to try and get to know what actually that feels like. And like you said, to raise the volume on those voices as well.
Yeah. Well, we've already begun the nuance conversation.
Sorry.
So no, it's good. No, it's good because it's actually a really beautiful way of studying the conversation. So we haven't talked about some of the other things that are going on. The escalation in the Middle East, which of course everyone's on the edge of their seat. We've just got to hope that the powers that be get this under control as quickly as possible and it doesn't escalate, because just like AI escalating its energy use, war is also the other thing that could send us over the cliff. So, we've got these big things going on. We're not in control. We can't do much about it. People are very emotionally involved in these situations, which and fear. It's the fear thing. I remember a friend of mine said when he was young, he was brought up in the UK, there was a threat of nuclear war. And from that point on, he spent his entire childhood with this fear that nuclear war was going to happen in his lifetime, right? And I think we're going through an equivalent time now, and young people in particular, they've got multiple global crises coming at them. And so that feeling of fear and helplessness and hopelessness, and youth suicides are up and self-harm is up and all that sort of stuff that's going on. And we need to be doing the right thing by the kids. We need to be helping the kids. And so I think it's on us adults to be adults. And, that's why Joe and I agreed that this concept of just talking about nuance. And Joe, do you want to kick off with talking about how you sort of look at it, what you think?
Well, I am someone who likes to approach things based on hearing all sides and hearing not just all sides, but also to explore sometimes ideas that haven't even been brought up, right? To try and figure out what should we do sometimes with the situation. It's really, for me, I have some disdain for the idea that you can just come into a situation and just make a decision about things. And many times, I think what we do is we preload our decisions. We preload our ethical, what we would do in whatever situation. We preload it, we rehearse it, and we kind of know what we're going to do with it, right? I'll just give you the thought that crossed my mind actually was earlier when you were talking about the what's her name, the star of Ted Lasso,
Hannah.
right? I mean, that response that she had, that immediate response that she had. Some of it is because we just thought about it before, and we have all these ideas at the tips of our tongues, and so we're ready to go with those things. And I think sometimes we need to get past that and go like, okay, is there something else to this? Is it really fair? I find myself thinking about things like that, where even when there is a propensity to want to think a certain way, I go like, well, but is there some validity to all this, right? Like we talked about Elon Musk, talking about how we have to have people who are bigger thinkers, big world thinkers, big picture big thinkers, and I began to ask myself, well, is it because he's not a big picture thinker, or is he a bigger than us picture thinker? Because I was thinking about where that money would go, and I think he would bet on another planet. I mean, he would try to think that that's the big thinking about that, for instance, right? I mean, so and the thing is, do we automatically say, okay, that's wrong? Is it wrong? Is it right? I was looking at well, for instance, we talk about war, we talk about Israel, we talk about what's happening in the Middle East. And I was pretty sure I had my mind made up about where and how things were going to run, and I also heard the ideas of war and said, oh, you know what, I think I've heard it all, and I still think they shouldn't do it the way they're doing it right now. And then what I did was I went further back, and I went back to World War II, and was actually finding out more about what was happening in Japan during as the end of the war was coming up, and what the Americans had done in terms of their war campaign. Now, most of us do not know what happened in terms of bombing in Japan. Most people think of the bombing of Japan as 2 nuclear weapons, and that's how the war ended, right? We don't know the part where 67 Japanese cities were firebombed with napalm in a devastating way. The brutality was complete. And yet the Japanese were not ready to surrender. It wasn't going to happen. The emperor was resolute about that, and he was prepared to put his people at risk. And what happened with the nuclear bomb in the end, the nuclear bombs, was as I think about it, and as I think most people contemplate about it, we think, how could the Japanese think of it in any other way except a terrible thing? And yet, when American philosophers visited Japan, the Japanese philosophers thanked America, not through the philosophers, but thanked America for the action that they took with the nuclear weapons, because it saved Japanese lives. It's a complex calculation or complex idea, but they felt, and their belief was, that more than 1 million Japanese lives were saved by the brutality that was demonstrated. And the question is, what would have happened if not for that brutality? Would the war have come to an end? Would it just stretched, and would we have had just more people die because the sign was up, war, we're open for business, right? So it's that kind of thinking which makes me go, it's not going to be just as simple as that. So we talk about the environment, and we say it's let's just stop. And I go, if we stop every single thing that we do that is bad, we also stop every single thing that we do that might be good. We talk about GMOs, for instance, and people don't want to get into genetics and modification, and that's, we don't know what what it could be, what could happen out of it. But we also have to say at the same time that it's responsible for making the world capable of supporting itself. When I think it was in the 70s or 80s, we thought we were going to run out of food. Right? It just wasn't going to be enough food because it couldn't be done with what we had and how we did things. And then genetic modification came along, and crops became much more productive. And with all the things that were bad that came along with that, in terms of the food being less diverse and what have you, we also have the advantage on the other side, which happens, from that perspective. So it's never really as easy as this. The law of unexpected consequences, it looms great on the many things that we face. That there are certain, I'll just use a personal example of my family this past week. My daughter's been trying to make some arrangements with the airline, Turkish Airlines, and she's been running up against one challenge after another, and it's been. It seems like it was a terrible thing. It should read as a bad chapter. But everything that we went through together as a family, because we were trying to solve this problem and we got together and did all those things, also produced something else that was great. So, that's kind of my thinking about things. It's in a world where we look at black and white as the answer, where you've got, you've seen the post that I put up. And I have to admit, thanks to AI as well, right? Well, in a world that is usually going to resort to black or white, the answer is usually in the gray and somewhere in there.
Yeah. A couple of points you sort of said. I'm like you, Joe. I pay attention to information that I don't like, and it's actually uncomfortable for me to listen to, but I'll listen to or read. But I do it because I think it's really important to understand all of the different perspectives, because I'm just challenging myself with my own knowledge, right? And I do that all the time. But the thing about Elon Musk is I think sometimes you think we're all after him. I'm not. I find him an intriguing character. But one of the things that I've learned in my life, that you can be very, very intelligent but still be very, very stupid. because it's all about how you imply your intelligence, right? So you want
Mom,
to go
is
down,
that you, Mom?
yeah, exactly. If you want to go down any rabbit hole and learn everything about it, and you might be the most important, you could be the most intelligent person down that rabbit hole, but you're actually wrong, but you're intelligent. So you know what I mean? I've seen that in many ways.
Yeah.
But the other thing with people, so, I worked in the technology industry for most of my career, and I've been in the rooms with the big people, not Alan. What is he doing the right things? The whole Mars space thing is just beyond, like, for right now for the world, it's just not what we need. But, but the one thing is ego. And I think he's definitely got a massive ego, and that's become very prevalent in, since he bought X. But the other thing that I notice with people like him and other people like him is they're very, very disconnected from reality. They're not on the ground seeing it. They don't understand the pain of people, and you see it in the technology industry all the time. Technology is a wonderful thing. You were talking about GMOs, right? So I'm not 100% against the concept of GMOs either. I do appreciate the harm. Also, they reckon we're going to lose all the bananas because there's some virus that's going to take them all out, and we've gotten rid of all the other banana varieties, so we're going to be out of bananas, right? That sort of stuff. So yes, it's food technology, GMOs. They've enabled us to get to 8.1 billion people, which is also the problem, So we've got too many bloody people to feed in a world that's starting to degrade environmentally, and so feeding people is going to be a challenge in the future. And technology is not going to be the answer or the only answer, And so the tech bro sort of focus it's just too technology. We've got to prioritize nature restoration, and we can do the tech stuff, but it can't be the only thing we do, and that's one of the big problems that I'm seeing.
Andrea, I hear you on the, a lot of people, too many people. I think with the work I do, my kind of approach to that is that every single person is valuable. I'm not saying that you don't think that, but, it's about helping each individual to really kind of connect to their true self. So I really love the work by Donald Winnicott, who talks about the true self, the false self. So, okay, there's 8 million people, but are they awakened to who they really are? Because they could help solve the problems. If they only see themselves as a cog in the machine, or if they only see themselves as consumers and not producers, not creatives, I think that's the part I think myself and other people like me or in this space try to do, is to help people to awaken to who they really are. Because we can't just keep waiting for the government or Elons of the world to do the right things, or the things we think are right. We need to, like you said, from the other 50%, help them to see what they could be or who they really are. And the solutions will come from there, because a lot of work I do is really helping people to find kind of their meaning and purpose in their lives. And it's incredible what comes out of somebody that was believing a story they were told by their culture, society, all of those things. But when they kind of connect to who they really are, they come alive. And most of them, all of them that I've worked with, have this passion and purpose that's beyond themselves. And research has shown that people who find deepest fulfillment in their lives are those who give their lives to the service of others. So that's, I think, what we can do. That's what we can focus on as individuals, is to ask the question, what story am I believing? What stories are out there? What stories am I not seeing? And, I love that you said, Andrea, that you seek out the stories that kind of makes you uncomfortable, because you're willing to be discomforted to really understand. And that's what we can do. We can be bridge builders in building that nuance. And that's been why I could maybe raise funds for universities or build my own business or connect to people. It's because I'm interested in their story, and if we can become more interested in each other's stories and find places of connection, that's where we can start to all see, hey, wait a second, there's bigger issues going on here. What are we going to do about it?
Yeah, I agree. And then the individual sort of self-development that leads into the collective, coming together as communities again, because of course that's another big issue in the world, is the loneliness epidemic, right? We need, You want to say? No. All right. Tim, what do you think? I thought he was paused, and then his eyes moved.
Yeah, no. I continue. Let me dwell.
Okay. All right. So
I'll jump in if you don't mind. Just a
Okay.
little thought about this. I think what happens is, again, where the temptation is to kind of come up with a kind of homogeneous answer to things. We need to all come together. We need to do all these things together, right? We want equal pain. We want equal effort. That's the kind of desire we would like to have. That's why we have all these conflicts in our I think in our lives, domestic situations as well. Couples that fight the most are the ones who think that we have to divide everything equally, right? It's a bit because you figure out how you're not equal and why you're not doing this or not doing that. And this is again a pitch about nuance. Nuance is not going to be about everybody doing the same thing, everybody in the same to the same level. And I was thinking about this today, and I thought, what if we just got comfortable with the idea that we're all heading towards the right door? We're not all going to be doing it at the same speed. We can't all do that. We're not. It takes some time to get round to it. We need the different things are going to make you get up and do something. You're going to be maybe like me, who spends a few years around Andrea, and bit by bit, I'm more aligned with what she's talking about. Or are you like somebody else who just wakes up one day and you read something and you go like, wow, I didn't know that. That's bizarre. And then you don't even realize that, well, it wasn't even true. But you know what? Now I'm moving in that direction. I'm doing something about that. So everybody is, not everybody. We have this impatience with people to come along as we are doing right now. You're not environmental enough. You're not this enough. You're not that enough. Whatever it is. Yeah. How do we work it out? How do we influence? And how do we get okay with, what people think? I mean, like right now, are we comfortable with a whole bunch of people who really think the opposite of what we're thinking about right now? Right? Like the environment. Are we able to sit down across from a technologist who is absolutely sure that we're going to get out of this through the innovation of the ingenuity of the human spirit and the mind, right? Are we also okay that it might be a handful of people who do this? If 2% of the world create the solution that takes us out of it, and in the process, I mean, let's lay it out, right? And in the process, we lose the corals, but we come back to such a place where, for instance, the ice caps get restored, just one thing at a time. If something happens that way, are we going to be okay with that? Or are we still going to be going like, yeah, but the corals, we want it all. We do want it all. We want everything to be as good as it was, but we don't want to also be the one that says, the problem with the world is we have too many people in the world right now. I volunteer to leave. I'll just give a... For those of you not following Marvel, you would have missed Tim doing the Thanos finger snap
right
for the second time this show.
But I mean, the population argument's a big one in the circles that are having these conversations, and it's been well proven. If everyone lives within the boundaries of what the planet can provide, and that obviously means we need to all go plant-based. We need to consume less stuff, like, buy 5 new articles of clothing a year sort of thing. We need to get out of our cars if we can. We need to, get on public transport. We need to stop buying plastic, anything in plastic, not just single-use plastic, but all single-use products, right? If we can all do it, we can reduce our impact on the planet. So it's been proven. And so to me, the biggest shift is it's a gentle push. Like, everyone's aware of it, I think, right now there, and there's people fighting back against it, but I think everyone's aware. It's just like, we just all need to slow down, calm down, and everyone's in a rush. Like the travel that's going on in the world at the moment, everyone's in a rush. Got to go and see the world before it's all over. That's what it feels like to me. Just got to calm down. Got to go more local. Grow a garden. Get our hands in the dirt. Make sure the worms come back into the dirt because they're really important. We just got to get really kind of simple again, and it's not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing because if you ask the majority of people, are you happy with what life is throwing at you? And there's a desperation in the majority of people that you speak to, especially today. Now, you get on the streets in the UK, people, the amount of children who are malnourished in the UK. Not in Africa where they've got extreme famines, in the UK. So we're in a cusp. But I thought there was this. Found this research, and so one of the concepts is called the truth binary. So I believe, or I don't believe. So I believe the government's good, the government's bad. I believe that the climate crisis is rubbish, or I believe it's true. So basically, what this guy's suggesting is probabilistic thinking. So the idea of this is I'm 90% certain that I'm correct. As a response. So you never go into anything with certainty, 100% certainty, which means that you can stay open-minded. So I thought that was good. And then the goodness binary, which we all know, good and bad. Donald Trump is bad or good, depending on who you speak to. And I love talking to people who support Trump. So I will happily talk to them. And I am capable of telling them some of the good things he's done. So I'm not just going in at it from I despise the man. But yeah, the good, bad thinking. And so, of course, the recommendation is grey thinking, which is in the title here. And that's, so this is really tiny fonts. So the questions you ask yourself are, what are the pros and cons of this? So if you whatever side you're on, always look for the other side. Who benefits from this and who is harmed? And that to me is one of the biggest things. So a lot of the thinkers out there that get a lot of traction and who I don't agree with, I always look into how they're being funded. And there's a lot of fossil fuel funding behind these voices. And most people don't even ask that question. Or, they're selling vitamins off the back of whatever rubbish they're sprouting, right? So they're making money to do what they're doing. And there's a lot of that going on at the moment. And the other one is, what value does this thing I dislike create, even if this sort of value is not the kind of value I care about? So really appreciating that, I think that's a little nuance. So it's put yourself in the other person's shoes. Cultural intelligence, so my husband's just been with a bunch of Americans and he's meeting a whole bunch of customers all across Asia. So when the Thai customers come to the exhibition stand, he's like, sawadee-ka, very respectful. He knows how to bow. When he's working with his Indian customers, it's a different way of approaching them. When he's with his Japanese customers, when he's with his Australian customers, it's usually more rowdy. But Steve's been in Asia for so long, he's really understood all of the different nuances between the different cultures and how to behave in a way that shows his customer respect. And then they are very loyal to him because of that respect. And the Americans are just like they're blown away by it. They're like, wow, and he's like, well, I've been working here for 20 years. If I don't know this, then I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be respectful. So I think cultural intelligence, I interview some people sometimes and the way they go about things. So the guys that I've been interviewing from Africa recently, they're so sweet, but they're very formal. Or a couple of ladies that I interviewed from Pakistan, they did a presentation first rather than just have a conversation. And I was just like, okay, that's how you need to do it. And a lot of people are incapable of trying to put themselves in another person's shoes. So Cheryl, you're from South Africa, you're living in New Zealand, and you're going to be going through a bit of culture shock there, right? What are you noticing? What's the big differences? Because
Yeah, so like I said, a lot of people, there are a lot of South Africans here already, but one thing I have noticed is that, the first things I noticed was that the diversity here is not the diversity from South Africa, so that's a different type of diversity. So if you're hearing noises, because I'm living in the inner city, so that's probably what you're hearing. Kiwis are generally, very polite. They don't really like to ask for things directly, and South Africans are very direct. We say things as it is, So I'm learning the nuance of kind of just, like you said, taking a step back, kind of letting them lead, and then finding how we can connect. And I found some amazing connections, and I've really been volunteering to speak at different places, because the more I try to serve and connect, the more the trust is built. So something as well that I think a lot of migrants, well, I didn't know this, is when you go into a new work environment, your experience in your home country is great, but you don't have experience in your new country. So until you get that experience, they kind of don't really, know what to do with you, especially if
Yeah.
you've had a CV like mine, where you've got 3 careers and different pathways. And it's like, who is this girl? What is she doing? Like, Kiwis are very show me the bottom line people. So I've changed my CV 3 or 4 times. And, I think it's just, even though it's difficult, because you almost expect them to meet you halfway, and they do, you still have to make that extra effort to understand, to show that you are willing to, connect and learn and adapt. And I think once you build their trust, then they get that. But also, you have to understand it from their perspective. There's so many people coming into the country, so that's also something that you have to bear in mind. Is, if I was a local here, what would that be like for me? And to also understand that and to be aware of that. So those are the things I'm finding that's been interesting.
Yeah, because there's a big population of migrants from India into New Zealand as well, right? And so
Yes.
with your race, just with your race, you would have presumptions made about who you are before you even open your mouth. So
Exactly.
that, just those sort of things. But when I went back to Australia after years and years working in across Europe and across the US, it took me 6 months to get a decent job in Australia, because I didn't know Australia, because I'd been working, and I was like, but I succeeded in these other bigger markets like instantly, and you don't think I can do the same in this much, much smaller market? But so it's a two-way thing sometimes, right?
Yeah, you have to get over your offense.
Mm.
And you have to then say, well, I'm going to show you what I can do, and the best way. And so I've been volunteering at the university, learning about students there. So the way things are done here is that you kind of volunteer. They have to first figure you out, test you out, see how you are, and then they can kind of give you the next opportunity. So yeah, you have to figure out how things are, and then adapt to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an exciting challenge. It's massive personal growth. Tim, come on.
All right.
Lay it on us.
I've been tracking. Look, I'd like to do a shout out to myself for taking the time to respond, and to not just say the first thing that I was thinking at the time, but to go, I need some time to process what we're talking about, and before I then respond. And the reason why I'm saying that is, I think that's something we're lacking today. I think it's something we lack on social media. We pull out our gun and we shoot. It's like social media is like there's a wild, wild west there, where somebody says something, we trigger. And something that came to mind recently, I get sucked into religious conversations when people are, bashing online. I'll go in and sort of I'll end up saying something at some point. And I've learned over time to pick your arguments to the degree where, it was very validating recently, where a lecturer was presenting on conversations about a particular very sensitive topic, and about which pockets of the population, or which pockets of a particular ideological presentation that's presented to him, whether he would engage with that particular person or not. And the idea was, if they have already adopted this perspective, and like Andrea, you were talking about that truth binary, whether they had selected a team and were just not, they're already almost by selecting that team, they weren't going to budge in their thinking, or at least accept any new information coming in. As a result, there's he sort of says, I'm going to engage where I can make the most difference, and I'm not going to go up against the bashers in a particular field, because it's like on this show, sometimes we get people commenting on YouTube or whatever that have a very clear paid agenda, and they're trying to silence conversation in a particular area that is not profitable to their employers. And we might ask a sentence or two to gauge where they're at, but once they reveal their hand a little bit, we tend to go, all right, mate, yeah, good on you, and then just move on to having the conversation with the people that we really want to have the conversation with. Now, there's a risk in that. The risk is there may be some people that have been in an environment where that's the way to respond, or that's what they've been conditioned to do, and we kind of leave them in their own echo chamber or paid narrative. But I do think it's a sensible approach to a degree, because we're trying to communicate a thinking, an idea, a message, a perspective that we may be saying, I'm 90% certain this is correct, but we're willing to engage in the conversation about it. So recently, a friend of mine posted a picture of a map of Palestine from 1947, and it was covering the whole area post-World War II, 1947. I think it was 1947. And it was like, this is Palestine. And his comment was just saying, and the conversation that's come out of that has been really interesting, in that there's people that have just taken their side and gone, another map just saying as a response, or whatever. But then there's been these really interesting conversations about perspectives, and from different faiths coming in, different political sides coming in. And I sort of sat on the sideline a little bit, actually not really restraining myself. I was more observing the conversation before, and I was actually deciding whether or not to come in or not, because it's basically I'm coming in with a can of petrol on a blazing bonfire, going, you know what? Here's my can of petrol. But the conversation we had, particularly me and my friend who posted the thing, who was actually, and the way he was engaging with everyone was very mature and respectful, and he would be saying, I don't quite understand your particular position. Can you elaborate, to people who would come in with a sort of a big king hit swipe, to get them to sort of express themselves a little bit more clearly and with more detail, almost inviting them to say, here are the points of my argument, so that a debate about those points could happen, and that's kind of what I did. I went in to sort of address a particular point. Somebody had come in with a particular position that I thought, that's not really, I don't believe that the assertions and the assumptions that they're making are accurate. So, look, I think, to summarize a little bit about my position on this one.
Just going to ask you, did you know that person that you were responding to, or
No.
were they a stranger? Right.
Stranger.
Yeah. And were they
but I felt
participating?
it was a good discussion, though.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and you can tell by the way people talk if you can have a conversation with them, or if they're just going to be a fanatic, right? You can always tell.
Exactly. I mean, you know what? One of the things I sort of reflected on, and I think, by the way, this is a skill that is much needed in the world. I think we need the skill of reflection. I think if we did that, instead of pulling out our gun and reloading it all the time, I think the quality of the conversations and the thinking that we would have with people, the quality of our dinner conversations would be better. The dinner party conversations, the quality of our relationships would improve, and the diversity of thinking, even if we don't agree, would make us culturally smarter, and have a greater ability to respond and influence in an intelligent way that can actually solve problems rather than pour more petrol on it. But one of the things I did notice was that with that time, because that time, even when he responded to my first response, I sat back again and I let it percolate. I think percolation is another thing we need to be able to do. We need to when I'm given, I tell you, when I'm given a sermon title, a sermon verse, what I've been advised to do and what I've found very effective to do, it's the same thing, is to read it and then just have a week or two of doing nothing, almost letting it percolate. Read some stuff, but then just do nothing and just let it percolate, let it work. And it was the same thing with this guy's response about the political situation in the Middle East. And it was about me. I found what was effective was the fact that I didn't respond immediately, that I took a couple of days and even when I sat down to respond, I was considering how I was going to respond. And in the end, it was a gigantic response. And his response to that response was, what a fantastic response. And I don't agree with all of it, but I would love to talk about it more with you over a croissant and coffee and stuff like that, which is actually the outcome that we need. We need that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this more over a cup of coffee and a piece of bread, and break bread together in a way of community, even though we don't necessarily agree, and just have the conversation that just goes, I got a greater balance, which is what the No Show really is all about, is to give us that greater balance of what's actually going on rather than the headlines that are clickbait. It's to say, here's what's really happening and here's some different opinions about it. And yeah, sure, there's a bias that's coming out of the show. There has to be, because we're people.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's an intelligent conversation. I guess my contribution then is, don't be reluctant to pull the trigger until you've had that percolation time. And then maybe it's not a trigger we're pulling. Maybe it's extending a hand of conversation. A hand of conversation doesn't make any sense, but extending a hand of friendship and a invitation to conversation, perhaps.
Yeah, I like that. Oh, it's funny. There was another conversation. I don't know if it's the same one. I don't think so. Where it devolved into two people talking about spirituality and one person is a science person. So it's kind of like Joe with me and somebody else having a go at it, right? And but Joe would be the science guy, I'd be the spiritual sort of woohoo. But one conversation can be quantified, the science side, right? There's lots of facts you can throw at it. The other side can't be quantified. And I was watching this going back and forth, and I wanted to jump in and say, great conversation, guys. But I didn't, because I didn't know two of them. I only knew one of them. But the point that I sort of took away from it is, if people are doing no harm, who cares what they believe in, right? If you want to believe in spirituality, if you want to believe in science, like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Like, no one is doing any harm by their beliefs. And I think that'd be good. And I see lots of people post stuff that I'm just like, really? That's what you think? I'm like, all right. But I don't comment.
Yeah.
I don't argue. What's the point? I mean, it's pretty obvious what I think. I'm putting it out there in the world all the time, right? So I'm like, that's your right to talk about that. But if they start jumping on me and attacking me, then I might feel differently. But I don't want to fight with anyone. But if I don't know you and you just turn into a lunatic and start attacking me, I don't care. You're gone. If I know you, like, there's some pretty extreme people in my life, across the course of my life, who have some interesting ideas. I don't care who you are. I'll go to town because we know each other. We know where we're coming from. But complete strangers, it's sometimes it's just not worth it. And are you making any difference by getting involved and having a right fight? No. You're going to feel better about it? No. You know.
There is one positive to it, though. The one positive is when you articulate your position in those pointless fights.
Mm.
In a sense, you get a little bit more clarity on what your position actually is. So
True.
that you know what, it's like you're in the boxing ring and in the training gym. And you go, okay, I get it now. Now you're going in for the big fight. You're a bit more prepared. But
That's
yeah,
true.
So I think from that perspective, there is some value in it, but
Yeah.
social media is a
I find
dangerous place to put
the
it, because
the danger about getting there for me is engaging in conversations where sometimes there is no greater point or reason for it. Is that every now and then you'll say something that makes it something you can't go back on, and then you place yourself in a situation where you start to justify a position which really maybe isn't, maybe it's untenable, maybe it's you go like I like blue, and then now you're stuck with that, right? So
Yeah.
it's very few of us can actually be fluid. So again, I was thinking about this conversation, saying, okay, there's one thing that I think we should have be able to walk away, like look at things a bit differently with, is like, instead of looking at things in terms of like what harm is there, are they doing any harm? Maybe quantify things in terms of, are they doing any good? Is this good? What's the good in this? Why is this a good thing? And the other thing is, as we look at the world and we make ourselves wary of bias, recognize that bias doesn't mean wrong. We'll meet someone who's going to be very biased to the fact that the world is round. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's just we just have to be prepared sometimes for biased people who have a different view from us for ending up right. So some people are finding that out in the realm of the discussions about COVID after all the various things that have happened. Not everything that we took on as the science of its day was correct, and they were certainly biased in the other direction, and they turned out to be right.
Yeah, and also giving information time, right? It's like the virus was a great example. It's like it needed time. We needed time to know what it was going to do and what impact it was going to make. And all these people are arguing, and I'm like, how can you have a point of view like that when we're at this point and it's a virus and they're constantly evolving and we have no idea where it's going and we don't even know how many people are going to die or what the impact is going to be. And you're already so set in your ways with your opinion. How? And but that was part of the journey, right?
I think
Did you have the coffee, Tim? You've left a loop there. I wanted to know. Did you have coffee with that person?
Not yet, but we regularly have coffee.
Okay.
So we have croissant. So our thing is we have a croissant. So when he said, "Love,"
so there was already that conversation
happening about once a month or something like that. Yeah, he's a very dear friend. Yeah, but anyway, we're very, very different. He's I'm studying at a theological college, and he's a champion of French secularity. So
those are fun conversations.
Yeah.
Well, at least you test out your faith level, right? Of like, what do I really believe? Because you're having it tested. So there you go.
Well, yeah. I mean, actually, I'm testing out my apologetics, which is my ability to argue it and defend it in a way that's sort of cohesive in some degree. And I don't think I'm terribly good at that, but I think any sort of defensive argument, regardless of what the thinking is, I think we need to. My encouragement would be just step back and think for a little while. Look, this morning, I drove my daughter to school, and there's these two lanes of traffic that approach the school, and one lane goes into the secondary school, and the second lane is usually populated by cars that are going to primary school, which go further and then go into the first lane and turn in, if that makes any sense at all. Anyway, there was a long line waiting for the primary school. I'm taking my daughter to primary school, but there was nobody in the secondary school lane, which is actually the lane that we're all going to turn into. So I went into that lane and went all the way up to the front. The guy's waving cars on, and then he moves out of the way, and we both take off. And so we both take off, and the fella next to me, who's in the lane that wants to get now into my lane, just cut me off and came into my lane. So I did a very polite toot. Now there's a whole language of tooting the horn, right? And there's a nuance in horn tooting.
Definitely.
And so my horn toot was a friendly oi. That was the toot. It was a double toot, but it was a short toot. All right. And I think we could do a whole show on horn tooting. I tooted my own horn earlier. But in this particular one, I did a beep, beep. You know, it was like a beep and then a little bit of a and beep. You know, it was short little ones. And then after that, I pretty much forgot about it. But we both went in and I followed him in. We both dropped our daughters off and he pulled up and came out of the car to confront. Now, I was a bit, actually, after my double toot, all I wanted was a bit of a wave and I would have been happy. But he came up going, why did you honk at me? I wound down my window and he, you know, I didn't just drop my daughter off. So I'm also aware that there are girls just there. And he's like, why did you honk at me? I said, well, because you cut me off and nearly hit my car. And he goes, yeah, but I'm in the lane that's coming into here and there's a rule. And actually there is no rule. It's more a courtesy.
It's a norm.
It's a social dynamic.
Rule.
It's what Cheryl's experiencing now in New Zealand.
Yes,
their
norms.
nuances and their rules and their norms, right?
Yeah.
And I know that norm, and I would be, and you know, I came back and I sort of thought about it later, and but my first reaction, which I'm not terribly proud of, was you nearly hit my car and blah blah blah. It was like a raise my voice, you know, I'm standing by my thing, and then after, and he was going on with the rule, and at that point I went and I just drove off. I left him standing in the driveway thing. I was just like, and I just drove away. And because I just felt like this is a dumb conversation in front of our girls and it's going to make them scared actually. And I drove off and I processed it. And I can sometimes, if I feel a great injustice, I can dwell in that injustice for far too long and feel like, you know, I need to rip off my shirt and have my superhero outfit and go and sort of seek justice. But actually this one, I wasn't like that at all. Actually, it was quite I didn't like the fact that I raised my voice, but what I did as I left was I was processing what just happened. And what happened was when he said there's a rule, the truth is there is no rule. Legally, I was right. And in the eyes of the law, I was right. In the eyes of cultural nuance and appropriateness, he was right. And then I put myself in his shoes. I would have been extremely pissed off with me, that driver that did what I did. In fact, earlier I was looking at other drivers to see if they were going in the outside lane to come back and push in, and I was going to judge them. But I did it on the inside lane, which was legally okay. So I guess what I'm trying to say is even something as stupid as that can end up with a confrontation that doesn't necessarily need to happen. It could have been avoided had I not tooted my horn and just let him go. And we did the zipper of everybody comes in and it just works its way out. For me, I think I get a lot of social learning when I'm driving a car. I know I'm taking too long on this particular example, but the point is, sometimes we are shooting from the hip. He didn't need to confront. He could have let it go. Good on him for having that sort of justice neuron fire. But you know, I know he's listening to the show, so I apologize to him. Because everybody is.
As far as
a microcosm for the world, where it's something small, we go to conflict.
Yep.
And in a way that we're both right, depending on whose perspective we're looking at. So the dilemma is, what perspective are we going to hold on to? I prefer blue.
So I think he's more right because you broke the social norms and the rules, and we all know the school drop-off procedures. So Tim, you're actually definitely in the wrong. But I figure we probably should close up. And now that we know that Joe is fluid, did you guys pick up on that? What's keeping you distracted? Unless anyone wants to say anything, final conclusions or anything, of course you're welcome to.
Final conclusion would be, in a world that is chaotic, what are you hoping that you could live for? I think that's the question that I always try to bring into every audience I speak to is, you can't change the world, you can impact the world, but what are you living for? You know, because there's something inside of us that is looking for that meaning. And when you find that, life becomes more purposeful. Even though there's a lot of things that are out of control and chaotic and overwhelming in your world, are you actually owning your story and becoming the hero of your own life? That's a question I wanted to leave with everybody. What's keeping me distracted is my 4-year-old daughter. She's a wonderful delight and gives me copy for books to write for many years. And I also read a book called Hero on a Mission. Andrea, I think you'd like this book. I would recommend it to you. The author is Donald Miller, and he talks about how to become the hero of your own story. I liked his work because it's also something I use for my work. But in there, he speaks about how to not be a victim in your life. He talks about the victim energy, the villain energy, and then the hero energy, which is taking accountability for what you can do, living on a mission, and then becoming guides to others to actually own their power and live the life that you can create. So you can't change things, but you can create your own world. So, yeah.
Sounds good. I'm just waiting for Rohit's book to arrive. He's I haven't got it written in front of me, but we should get him on so we can talk about it. So he's very much talking about sort of the inner peace and contentment. All right, Joe, what's keeping you distracted, buddy?
I am trying to work on my mentalism. I'm trying to get another aspect of myself on stage where I do great feats of mystery based on the mind and the way we think. And I'm reading a book by Aaron Alexander right now called Reality as an Art. It's the most expensive paperback book I've ever bought. But the essence of it essentially is how we are all connected as human beings, and we have a tendency to behave in certain ways because of that connection. And if we actually emphasize and draw out those connections, we can actually have legitimately magical experiences. So I'm exploring that very esoteric bit of text, and for someone who's actually dyslexic, I think it's proving to be quite a mean task. But I try.
Well, that sounds interesting. You're gonna have to share more about that, Tim.
Confronting will to power.
All right.
I know. I love your surrendering sigh. I have a surrendering sigh too, because I don't particularly want to read all of this thing. But this particular guy is Reinhold Niebuhr, and his whole philosophy of just war, kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier when Joe was talking about Japan and everything else, about where's an act of evil, dropping bombs, etc., justified to stop a greater act of evil, for example, and then how he reconciled that theologically with the whole idea of love and its tension with justice. And I just thought it was fascinating, because I've got an exam on this book, which is like a huge, and I've got only a little bit to go on Monday, so I'm a bit consumed with that as well. But I have to write an assignment on this guy. I've chosen to write an assignment on this fella, and I'm quite excited, because as I read his ideas, I was like, something sort of awoke and went, yes, that makes practical sense, and I want the practical implementation part. I mean, I've just been reading about women theology and Black theology, and South American theology, which is liberation theology, and the interconnectedness between all three. And that article on the Nike element really resonated with those theologies of, this is ridiculous. Why are we still stuck in these models? So I'm quite enjoying it. It's overloading. There's lots of coffee and not enough time for croissant, but it is. I got about 3 weeks left, and then I've got a bit of a brain holiday.
Nice.
Before doing it all again. So yeah,
it must be fun. Just challenging your brain.
It totally is. I'm loving it. It's stressful. There's an academic tsunami coming, and I'm in a little boat in an ocean, but I'm enjoying it.
It's a good place to be when the tsunami comes, actually.
Nice.
Please don't joke about tsunamis, guys.
Well, it depends. Not if you're on the peak of the wave. Joe, I've almost finished Three Body Problem, and well, have you guys seen it yet? Three Body Problem.
Yeah, three
so
body problem. Just to be sure it doesn't sound like three buddy problem.
Yeah. I got 1.5
That's whole
episodes to go, which I'm saving to watch with Steve. But I watched A Star Is Born. So what's his name? Bradley Cooper and the Lady Gaga version with my 17-year-old son, because of course both of my boys are on the path to become metal or rock heroes in their lives. And that was a very, very, very interesting experience to watch it, because of course the Bradley Cooper side, where he's self-abuse and all that sort of stuff, and just opened up a really powerful and deep conversation with my son. And he sort of said, is that what's going to happen to me? And I'm like, well, so the difference between you and the character that it's based on is that you've been brought up in a house where you every single day you're loved, and you also feel safe. And, so the character that it's based on would probably never had that, because his mum died in childbirth and his dad was an alcoholic. And it just opened up I love having those conversations with my boys when they're getting old enough to have them. And it's, I enjoy motherhood now, not 4-year-olds, Cheryl. That was just chaos. And
I know. I love 4-year-olds. I loved every chapter, and I want to keep her in each chapter, but she's growing.
No, the teenage years, because I got 2 boys, but at 16 and 17 now, I'm just hearing what they think, and where they're getting their opinions from, challenging their opinions. Sometimes, Jack's expressed an opinion, and it's an opinion I'd heard other people expressing. And I said, did you watch the original piece of information that was based on? And he said, no, he'd been listening to somebody else's opinion. So I said, go and watch it, and then let's talk about what you think about it, not what somebody else thinks about it. So I like that.
I like the way that I like that parenting style, because it's moved from authoritarian into more coach.
Yeah.
And I think that's necessary. Otherwise they're just going to rebel and leave. And,
exactly, right.
The leaving part is inevitable, but the rebelling, if that could be put off as much as possible, or at least subdued somewhat. So
they're not too bad.
Yeah, Zoe's 8, so I've got a few years yet.
But you also have a Zoe.
Oh yeah, really?
I have a Zoe. Yeah, she's
nice.
Well,
I had a Zoe first.
You did.
Yeah.
Did you have you guys read Hold On to Your Kids?
I should have thought about that before I said anything.
Have you read Hold On to Your Kids by Gabor Mate?
No.
No, but I listen to a lot of what he says.
Yeah, the audiobook is also really helpful because it's quite a thick book. But there he talks about the danger of the current generation. And I do a lot of work with young people. One of the reasons why I do the work I do is because there was a suicide of a student when I was working on that campus. And, I went to his funeral and thinking this should not have happened. We need to help young people, like you said, Andrea, to navigate all of these challenges because they're living in a digital world. They don't know how to live in the real world. So we need to help them with that. But what he was saying was so insightful around children are connecting to the peer group too early. And we need to keep them connected to us as long as possible, because the minute they get connected to the peer group, they kind of lose a sense of being able to reason and to challenge thinking. So yeah, that's a book I would definitely recommend to read.
Does it, Cheryl, does it look at screen time as well in that?
I can't remember. I need to go back to that. I struggle with that too, screen time. Yeah.
There's another book I've got on order, which is a guy that's talking about social media and digital technology for kids, and about this whole revolution that needs to happen around it. He's saying they shouldn't get like phones or smartphones until they're like at least 16. And so there's some, I can't remember the author. I listened to him on a podcast.
Our TV just broke. Well, our big lounge TV, we've got another TV here, but our big lounge TV just broke. And so we're not replacing it. We're trialing not replacing it. And Zoe seems quite happy with that. So for me, the thing here is getting her reading and reading together. So she's reading her thing and I'm reading these things. And she's seeing me reading and she's reading. And so that sort of stuff, it's a bit of a battle sometimes to get her to read because she wants to watch her stuff. But but we're getting a reading, and I think that's half the battle won. If she can be reading, I think that's why I want to. Having said that, I want to show her the Matrix, where you just plug in and you learn everything. And I said we don't have that at the moment. Joe's bit on AI and Sam Altman. We may get that at some point, but this is it. It just takes a little bit longer for the upload.
Yeah.
We've never had a
plug in.
TV my entire marriage, so my daughter's never grown up with a TV. So she goes to visit people, and she's like, "Wow, I want to go to visit them because of the TV." But there's some great libraries in Auckland, so we've been on regular book binges, and she loves books. So yeah. So at least that's right. So I feel a bit better about when she has screen time because I know she has a lot more book time.
How good.
Can I just put this out there to everybody here? Don't keep your kids away from AI. The future is going to be very much there, and AI isn't coming for your job. Someone who's good at AI is coming for your job.
No, I agree. It's everything in balance, right? All right, we've gone over, so we're going to say hooroo for another week, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And if you want to come and join the show, just reach out to one of us, and we'll get you in. I think we don't have a guest for 2 weeks, so we need to secure that. But Cheryl, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. I know it's late.
It was really
now
great.
there. Yeah, it's been really lovely to have you.
This conversation was worth staying up for. So thank you, and I'll be following the show as well.
Cool.
I think we should have Cheryl back. I think as quality of guests go, you're a high quality guest. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. And then will I be able to talk about my book, Managing Money in the Real World, how we connect money with purpose? Because I know we can
talk money.
I know you talk money on the show, and I think it's important for people to start to realize that they can control their money story. So I'll be happy to talk about that.
Yeah, nice. All right. So we'll see you soon.
Follow the money show.
See ya.